Hello everybody. I feel like if we were to give this look a name, it would be I am the bow girl your mother warned you about. It's very like, I'm Amy. Today in this video I am going to talk about the books that publishers have sent me for free. Some of them are proof copies, aka early review copies, and some of them are final copies, and all of these have been sent for free, and I thought I'd just talk about all of these books that I have generally, all of these are books that I've liked and would recommend all in one go, because then if you mix them with books that you've bought yourself, it's just complicated with disclaimers, and I always want to make it really clear. And also I was asked recently, which I thought was an interesting question, whether I receive more books now, like proofs or review copies, now that I have a book club, now in its third year, Life's Library, book club I run with my good friend John Green. He's also known for writing some books and making some videos and doing some podcasts, but mostly he's my friend. Whether I receive more books because of that. And actually I don't. I probably received far more books 4 or 5 years ago, and that's not because I'm receiving fewer emails about proof copies. It's because I am saying no to more of them, because a lot of the times the books just aren't ones that I think I'd like or that I'm that interested in reading, or often I have like a massive backlog of books that I've, say, got out of the library and bought, and then also some early proof copies, and I'm like, I don't want to just keep acquiring books for the sake of acquiring books. But it's also because I am very conscious of the fact that books are made out of paper. Paper is not infinite, and I don't want to contribute to just shipping something unnecessarily to me that I probably am not going to be a massive fan of, or I'm not going to prioritise reading. And often it's also things, it's like I don't read much YA anymore. I don't read that much middle grade either. Like, I love YA and I love middle grade, I just don't read them that much anymore. So often if it's in those genres where there's many times a decent marketing spend or a marketing effort that's centered on like bookstagrammers and booktubers and so on, and BookTok and all the book preface things, then it's more likely you'll receive an email about them. That was a very circuitous way of saying, here are some books that I did receive for free and that I really loved. I have stacked them up in just general order of like width. The first book was one that I received from Picador. It's Of Women in Salt by Gabriela Garcia. It comes out in April 2021. April is, surprisingly, next month. It's coming in a few weeks. This is the 15th of April. It comes out. It's my dad's birthday, actually. And this is an intergenerational story of Cuban American women, and also there is a story about a woman from El Salvador and their daughters, and throughout the ages, and kind of through revolution, but also through very present day Obama era deportation and Trump era deportation. But it was a story just told really well. It's quite short. It's like 200 pages thereabouts. But I really got a sense of each character, and I really cared for each character. One of the reasons why I love generational stories is you do have those different perspectives, and right now, when we have these very harsh political realities, you see that play out through history. And so someone growing up first generation American, Cuban American in the States will have a very different experience from someone who decided to leave or had to leave, or didn't even have that choice and made different choices during their life in Cuba, or someone who chose to stay. And I really love that it shows that history, it shows the threads of that history. Like, that's again something that Isabel Allende does so effectively, I think. And again, Como Agua para Chocolate is set during the Mexican Revolution, and it as a genre, it does it so well, and I love it for that. Another reason why I love generational stories, especially right now, is that I care so much about how trauma is written about and how trauma is explored, but also about the theme of breaking cycles, how you see these things come up again and again in people's lives, and how there is someone at some point who says, no, enough. I don't want to pass this on anymore, and I don't want it in my life. I'm very affected by those stories. They ring true for me in so many ways. So I love reading stories about people breaking cycles. I love a family secret. I love the sense of things sort of hidden behind walls and below floorboards, things that are literally hidden in those places, but also emotionally hidden in those places, and memories that maybe a character will never talk about. Again, going back to the theme of trauma, but through the structure, through the form, film, you're able to go back and see that event and you learn things about their lives. As many people have gotten involved with finding out family histories during this period of time, I definitely have, and I've read up far more about my family history than I ever have, and I'm very grateful to one of my sisters who's worked so hard on doing the family tree. And there are so many amazing documents out there. But there comes a point in all of these histories where it just stops. Like, there's just no more history. And I'm very fortunate, as I say, that we have in my family a very full history and people who've been invested in keeping these family stories alive. But like, you get to certain points and the history just runs out. So I think as a form, it also allows you the fantasy almost of going back in time and having someone tell you their story firsthand, or finding an account of it somewhere. So that's Of Women and Salt by Gabriel Garcia. I should also say it talks about the theme of refugees, not just immigration, but of seeking refuge and seeking asylum, which is something that's so important to me and that I continue to find really compelling when it's written about and when it's explored in nuanced and careful and interesting ways. But also there are some first-hand experiences here of horrific asylum conditions, and that is something that I want to talk about more, especially in the UK, because I think that's it's very common for us to talk about awful asylum conditions in the US and far less common for us to talk about that in the UK. So that's just like a little side note. But yeah, and it also, has the question of legacy and history and how things go on. When you're telling a story across generations and across time, there is an awareness of time and an awareness of continuing, and what continues and what, like in the sense of what we break cycles with, what stops here. The next book I'm going to talk about is Grown Ups by Marie Aubert, who's a Norwegian author. So this was translated by, I want to say her name is Rosie Hedger. Translated by Rosie Hedger, and it's coming in June 2021 from Pushkin Press, who are an independent press. The way I keep talking about this book, and I don't know if it's going to be accurate to everyone, but like emotionally it's accurate to me, is like The Summer Book meets Motherhood by Sheila Heti. It has all these questions and explores all these questions of motherhood and fertility and people around you doing different things, and the protagonist in this book is 40 years old and coming up to this crossroads of deciding whether or not to freeze her eggs and whether or not she wants to become a mother. It's very much in that space, so if that's something that you're not comfortable reading about right now, then this isn't the one for you. But it also has a lot of that like philosophical play, but there's also incredibly funny moments, and the narration is fantastic. It's first person narration, and it has that dryness of the Summer Book, but it's also the main plot of the story takes place on an island at a family cabin, and it has that sort of microcosmic world of the Summer Book, while also showing how that might be suffocating for someone. And it touches a lot on the themes of grief. The protagonist and her sister lost their father quite early on, and that sense of choosing a life for yourself. But yeah, it's full of humour and that funny dynamic, those knowing turns of phrase. But I loved it. And this is another quite short one. I think it's 200 pages again, maybe 151 pages, so it's very short, but one that I already, even as I'm holding it, I'm itching to reread, that I would really, really recommend if you're after that kind of book. I think the thing that actually makes it feel like the Summer Book to me is not even so much the setting or the tone, but it's the feeling that I read it and I had a great time reading it, and then I put it down and I felt the book on delay, like it was a literal emotional wave afterwards of finishing it and then just feeling the book. I've had that with a few books in my time, but I always remember the ones that hit me like that, and the Summer Book definitely had that impact for me. Another one that had that impact for me is Never Let Me Go, where initially I was like, oh, I thought I knew how I felt about the book, but then I had almost like this afterbirth of the experience of reading it, that gave it this emotional resonance that I wasn't aware I was necessarily experiencing. Oh god, there were just so many good books to recommend right now. This is another one that's coming in June. You probably saw me raving about this on Instagram if you follow me on Instagram. I think I also raved about it on Twitter. I read this in one evening. This is Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. It comes out on the 10th of June 2021. I believe in the US it comes out in May. I love this book so much. I can't even, it's a very different story in a lot of ways from anything that's been in my experience, but at the same time it also feels like it came out of my brain, and that's the only way I know how to describe it. Anyway, it feels very familiar to me in terms of like, again, like magical realist tone, but it's not necessarily entirely that. So this is the story about Jess, whose parents have just lost their jobs and they are moving back to Malaysia. She grew up in the States, but her parents are from Malaysia, and her whole life, I think she's like in her early 20s, because yeah, she's graduated uni. She's known life in the States, and that's been her familiar experience. But for her parents, when they're in Malaysia, like, that's what they know, and they kind of get more comfortable kind of going back into their lives there. However, something is afoot, because upon her return to Malaysia, she starts hearing the voice of her ama, her grandmother. But the problem is, her grandmother died last year. She wasn't very close to her, she didn't know much about her, but her grandmother becomes a very present presence in her life. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because the joy of this book is watching the plot unfold, and it is a revenge story. It is a story, again, about learning about family history and family trauma. I suppose understanding the people around you in a way that you might not have had the opportunity to, had you just listened to listen to the narratives of those who tell you about the world. But I absolutely loved it. I don't know, it's just like the plotting was so tight, the story exploration was so tight, but I love the spirit world as a thing to explore and know and become close to. I think that's why I enjoyed the Murakami books so much. Like, I love I love this, and I'm very, very desperate for it to come out so that I can talk about it with people. But if you have also got a proof copy of it, then do let me know and then we can talk about it. Sorry, I just had to like, neurotransmitters was what I was thinking about. Anyway, the blurb will tell you a bit more about the plot, but I think just go in, just order it, trust me, order it from your local indie, read it, and then talk to me. Is how I feel about that book. Oh, I mentioned Never Let Me Go. And this was not an intentional segue, but I was sent an early copy of Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is now out, and I'd been a bit desperate to talk about it, but there was an embargo until March the 2nd. This is out now. Did I say that already? Probably. I love this. This was a weirdly escapist read, and you might not think of Ishiguro as like an escapist read, because if you have read any of his other works, you'll know that there's often like dystopian tinges or just like an exploration of a certain heaviness or injustice in our society, but the tone is always quite, it just carries you along, and then you're like, oh, okay, we're actually exploring something quite dark and intense here. Clara and the Sun is no different from that, and yet I lived in that world for an evening. It was a joy to escape into it. I walked around, I had to run a couple of errands, and I walked around the streets with my face literally in the book. So Clara and the Sun is a story about an artificial friend called Clara who looks out of the shop window and waits for someone to pick her up and choose her and take her home so that she can be their friend. So she is designed as a robot to become a friend and companion to someone. And we learn over the course of the book what that involves. But yeah, there was just so much heart in it, and I think I needed that, and so much hope in there as well. And it also just made me want to rewatch Ex Machina and Annihilation. It's just like, it just left me in a real mood for those films. And the sun element is because Clara is partly solar powered, as I will say are we, through the magic of photosynthesis, but it gives her a certain focus on the sun and its abilities. And you see over the course of even the early pages of the book, her taking in the mythology of what the sun can do. But again, I will leave it there, because this is definitely a story that's about plot, but it is also about very much the character of Clara and how that sort of blossoms and opens up in the people around her over the course of the novel. Why did it get darker? All right, we have a little bit of non-fiction with Can't Even by Anne Helen Petersen. Some of you might remember that I made a video about burnout probably 2 years ago now, and that was after reading Anne Helen Petersen's article about burnout that she wrote for, I want to say BuzzFeed, but it might have been The Atlantic. And this came out a while ago now. I think this came out like just before Christmas, so this has been out for a while. I loved this book. You can see how many pages at the bottom I dog-eared to go back to later. I will say it's very American-centric, and that matters for the first half of the book, which is building up context about the work environment, and it specifically centres on like the American work environment, but also like the American system of not having support when it comes to things like healthcare and the sort of rise and fall of unions in an American context. And initially I was a bit like, all right, like this is interesting, but I don't know that what I want to read about right now is America. All my life watching America. All my life Panic in America. I get tired of it sometimes, you guys. America has given me wonderful things. It has been a wonderful place of cultural exchange and much, much more, but sometimes I want to read about something different. Anyway, but it doesn't matter because halfway through it becomes related to the internet and how the internet structures and impacts our behaviour, and how we engage with it, and what we're going for when we post something on Instagram, but also how we there's this sort of exercise she does where she looks at, when she's scrolling through her feed, the different posts that she looks at, and then she writes out how they made her feel and why. Like, why did this make me feel bad? Why did this picture of a dog make me feel bad? Why did this picture of a sunset make me feel bad? And it's just a really interesting activity. And now, when I do open those apps, I notice myself doing that in my head. It's just, just things like that. But that's a real side note. So yeah, it begins in America, and then the second half of the book continues on the internet. Now, of course, American working has a big impact on how we work here in the UK especially, but it was definitely more when like internet and tech got involved that I was more interested. And there's an introduction, because this was written before COVID, before the pandemic, and there's an introduction that basically says, I don't want to pretend that while I was writing this I was fully aware of the pandemic coming, because she wasn't, but just imagine all of these structural problems and how our present situation would make all of these worse, or how it would affect those systems. And I really appreciated that introduction. It was one of the introductions that really framed the way I looked at the book in a positive and helpful way. And certainly when I got to some of those parts of it where you just feel like the structure and the support isn't there, or we've dug ourselves a certain kind of hole when it comes to our behaviour and our expectations for ourselves, productivity, how much worse elements of that are in a pandemic world, or in a lockdown world, or in a world in which, say, remote working becomes more normal, or 4-day work weeks, this was in the news this morning, 4-day work weeks become more regular. Will we actually see labour decrease, or especially in heteronormative partnerships, will we see men continue to do less of the labour in that respect, for instance? Like, how will it affect that? So many things to say about this. Let me just open one of these slide pages. I mean, I did a lot of underlining. Here's something I underlined on this page, and that is why people who have more than enough money, more than enough respect, still are involved in this at the expense of their families, because they need to feel needed, and there is nothing better than to complete things on a regular basis. Oh yeah, this was from how someone at Goldman Sachs responded to someone who was doing a research project. Karen Ho did a research project, leading up to and in the immediate aftermath of the Great Recession. In 1996, she took a sabbatical from her PhD in order to work at an investment bank, and she interviewed all these people. But this phrase about nothing better than to complete things on a regular basis, I was like, oh God, like, gets me in the gut, that feeling of like productivity for productivity's sake, and framing everything through that lens, like our emails, our tasks. And because everything is now like on our phones and on computers, and it just makes it feel like more and more work, that sense of needing to complete things and needing to have the satisfaction of completing them, etc., on a regular basis, was very helpful. So that's just like one random page I picked out from Can't Even, which, if you're trying to look at your relationship with work, but also with the feeling of needing to be productive, especially during a pandemic, I would recommend this for you. Another great one. This is Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan, which is also out now, that I was next on my pile to read, and then I saw my friend Savannah post that she just finished it and absolutely loved it, so I got even more excited to go in and read it. I love this one as well. You can see how many, this has a lot of dog ears too. It's so well observed. There are so many wonderful lines in this book. There are so many sentences that I'm just like, oh my God, how did you put that feeling into 12 words maybe? Or yeah, anyway, this isn't a light read. It's quite a heavy read. It has themes such as abusive relationships, controlling partners, eating disorders, self-harm. Like, it's a heavy book in a lot of ways, but that doesn't mean that I still like devoured it. I read it really quickly and so appreciated so many things that felt like they were observing elements of my life, even though I don't live in Dublin, I haven't lived with a partner. There are so many like superficial elements to the life of the protagonist in this book. It's a fiction book, by the way, the life of the protagonist in this book, and yet it was very helpful for me to read. It was just really, I loved it. I loved it very much. It's written, it has that lovely lens of the closer to the present 2019 in Athens, and that's introduced very early on, while also going back to this particular time that our protagonist is writing about in her 20s, when she met this person and became involved with them, but then also not just that, like what her life was like, what her friends were like, what a week looked like for her. So you have this, I think part of what I liked about it is that it provided a safe distance of knowing that this protagonist is going to be ultimately okay, or at least okay enough to be reflecting on it in 2019 in Athens. And that gave me a real sense of safety that I appreciated with that framing. I like talking about that right now is how I realised how that impacted me and made me feel. And then it allowed you to go into her life and to be with her when she's going through really awful things. And, she struggles with depression and, all these different self-destructive behaviours. But it allows you to be with her for that, but without being completely first person present with her there, because you have the safety, the narrative safety of the framing device. That doesn't mean that she holds anything back in those places. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but that's kind of the best way that I can explain it. Let's pull out an example of these great lines. In that moment, I knew that Lisa, and only Lisa, was able to see me as I really was. She alone could see the reservoirs of need that existed in me and would never stop spilling out, ruining all they touched, and she didn't hate me for them, but felt sorry for me. This appalling and instant knowledge cut into me, and I recoiled, turning from her and returning upstairs until I heard her leave the house. That's just like a random line, 28 pages into the book, that it's just so well balanced as a line. And I was thinking, as I was getting ready to read that out, the other thing that I really like about the framing of the present day in Athens, like, it's not like everything's sorted and everything's perfect, but it is someone wrestling with the question of how to tell her story and how to frame it, and it being a very intentional choice, and just having to make these choices, being aware of how it could be read and how it could be taken. And that meta stuff is stuff that I, for one, really love. So that's Acts of Desperation. It is out now. Megan Nolan hardback. It's out in the US as well. It is out in Ireland, and I'm sure it is out in many other places where you can buy, when you can buyeth, booketh. Two left. Oh, we've got a sexy book next. This is Women on Top of the World. It was published by Quercus, and this book is absolutely beautiful. It does have some talk about sexual violence and sexual assault, I will say that up front, but this was such a wonderful book because it's conversations with women from all around the world about sex, about what they like, about how they like to have sex, about things that they're nervous about how much experience they have. It's women of all different kinds of abilities. There are a couple of conversations with trans women in there. There are conversations with women as old as, I think like the oldest conversation, she's 74. Yeah, 74. And then these conversations are interspersed with really gorgeous artwork. I'll just show you a couple of my favourites. Like, here's this one done by a Brazilian illustrator called Sabrina Gavard. And they have links to their Instagrams as well. And it was such a beautiful way of breaking up this book, where sometimes the conversations can be heavy, or even if they're not heavy, they're just quite intense. Like thinking about, as a woman, like thinking about what you like and what you want, and about desire is not something that we are often asked, and we have learned, I think, to ask it of ourselves more and more as time goes on. I got cut off by the patriarchy. It can be quite an emotional thing to think about what you like and what you want and explore it, and thoroughly rewarding. But I think that the pictures serve as a really beautiful break between these stories, and also they're almost all of them are like a page or 2 pages, so you really get a sense of what someone likes and how they experience something, and then you have this pause, and then you have the next story, and you can dip in and out of it. But like, here are some of the other illustrations that I loved. All different styles. Like, there's some comic book style ones. Oh, there's one that I have in mind. I don't want to just show you all of them because I want some of them to be a surprise. Oh yeah, I love this one. Thought this was great. This is by Kim Thompson. And there was another one really nearby this one, because I remember seeing them both and being like, I love this one. No, this one's my favourite. Some more like abstract ones. Where's the one with roses? Oh, it's also Kim Thompson. That's why I love it. So they're by the same artist. It's this one. Oh gosh, it's so good. The stories are over a couple of pages. This is one about someone's experience undergoing FGM and then recovering and healing from it, and healing from the trauma of it as well. So all sorts of different stories, all sorts of different experiences, but I would really encourage you. It's so sex positive and also very gentle. I really got the sense reading it that the women were very comfortable, even when they shared that something was awkward or that they felt nervous about it, comfortable about sharing these extremely intimate experiences with the editor of the book, Lucy Ann Holmes. So yeah, I loved it. That was great. Women on Top of the World. Project Hail Mary, which I think comes out in May. Yeah, 4th of May. So coming out really soon. By Andy Weir, who's the author of The Martian. And this is a lovely dramatic copy with black sprayed edges that did start kind of come off in my hands, but whatever. I really loved this. I again read this really quickly. All of these books I read really quickly because they just truly consumed me and consumed my focus, which is such a nice feeling right now. This really played to the strengths of The Martian, his first book. I wasn't keen on his second book, to be honest, but his first book, it has a lot of the same elements. It has this like survivalism in space, someone by themselves trying to problem solve. Like, there's so much wonderful, extremely science heavy, but not science intense problem solving going on, as you can see someone like work through a problem. And there is the great humour. There's the incredible humour that was very present in The Martian, and that I think has been brought home here again, especially in his interactions with the protagonist's interactions with another character. So the premise here is that someone wakes up on board a ship and has complete amnesia, does not remember a single thing about why they're there, but their memory comes back to them a little by little, or at least some of their memory comes back to them. But yeah, you're kind of thrown into it in sort of the same way you're thrown into it in The Martian, and it has that mystery element as you're trying to piece all these puzzles together, but it also has a lot of like the wonderful darkness of stories like 2001. It like really feels like he has such a visual way of plotting, that there are moments that I just like see it as a film in my head. But I really love this. I'm excited for more people to read it, so that we can talk about elements of the plot mostly. But I felt something I really appreciated is that I do feel like the first two books in particular, the female characters were kind of lacking, and there are some women in this book who feel much more sort of grounded and like women that I know here, and they're not central to the story, but they're sort of like central enough that I felt like he maybe took on board some of the feedback from his first two books, so I appreciate that as well. But Project Hail Mary, I just like, if you love space, if you love problem solving, if you love survivalism, and a lot of this, as I was reading it, also gave language to like some of the ways I've been feeling the last 12 months or so, on my own little spaceship. I love that process of like, there's some kind of urgency here, there's some kind of clock ticking, but I'm not fully aware exactly of what the stakes are yet, but I know that by default, because he is in space, those stakes are really high. And that's another wonderful thing about space as a setting, I suppose, more than a genre, is that it immediately adds like a level of urgency to any scenario that, beginning there, and also without something that astronauts and anyone who's encountered space in any way has to rely on, which is knowledge, let alone contact, like knowledge, understanding of the space and the environment and so on. Starting from that baseline, immediately you're like, oh, this is going to be tense, and it's a very tense read, but also you won't want to put it down, so it's fab. Anyway, Project Hail Mary, out in May. I almost waited to film this video until I'd finished some other books, and then I was like, no, if you don't make it now, you're never going to make it, so you gotta make it while you can make it. That's what I said to myself. And there are some other books coming out this summer. Like every single one of my friends pretty much is publishing a book this summer. It's really exciting. So some that come to mind, for instance, coming up on I want to say the 4th of May, probably, is Sana's book club journal. So for those of you in book clubs, who've started book clubs, joined book clubs, maybe you're part of Life's Library, Sana has created this brilliant book club journal where you can keep track of all your reads. If you are keeping track of reads, by the way, I'm on Storygraph. I will put a link to that in the description bar below. A lot of people always ask me, like, are you on Goodreads? No, because I don't participate in Amazon-owned entities. I do not like Amazon. I'm not a friend. I'm not a friend of Amazon, but I am a member of Storygraph, and I love it there, and I love watching Storygraph be built while I'm on it, so I am keeping track of my reading there. But yeah, Sana's created this wonderful book club journal, which has prompts about different books that you read in a book club, but it also has lots of reading lists, so that's absolutely fab. Reputation coming out on the 8th of July, which is Lex's debut novel, which is so fantastic. It's steeped in the humour of Austen. It has like Secret History vibes, it has Gossip Girl vibes, and I'm just so excited for everyone to read that. The Anthropocene Reviewed book by John didn't just come out, but it got its cover. It comes out on the 18th of May, and the cover is so beautiful, and the book is so beautiful. I'm really excited for everyone to read it. So that's coming out. Ashley Ford has her memoir coming out, Somebody's Daughter. I'm definitely forgetting someone. Everyone has a book, and I'm excited for all of them. Sorry, is that too much energy? But that is how I feel. Let me know what 2021 reads you're excited about in comments below, as well as if you've read any of the ones I mentioned or if you're excited to get them. It's always really helpful, just for me personally, to know if a book that I recommended on here has been one you've gone out and bought, because I don't know, I just like seeing it happen. It's not even helpful, it's just pleasurable. So please do share if you've bought a book that I have recommended on here or on the internet in general. I think I have to sign off now. I just want to keep talking to you. It's quite sad, isn't it? Oh well, that's how I feel. Bye bye.